God did not give him a map. He did not give him a timeline or an explanation of what the road ahead would look like. He gave him one sentence, and the man packed everything he owned, said nothing that the Bible records, and walked out of the life he had spent 75 years building. That man was Abram, the man who would later be called Abraham. Before we go any further, it is worth saying what this story is not. This is not the story of a man who never doubted and never made mistakes. The Bible records all of those moments, and they are in the text plainly. This is a story about a man who kept moving through all of it, not because he was without weakness, because the God who called him did not take back what he had said. Stay until the end of this video, because there is one detail in the original Hebrew of Genesis that almost nobody stops to look at. 2 words. And when you understand what they actually mean, this entire story opens up in a way you will not expect. If this channel is new to you, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. We release new stories regularly, and we do not want you to miss what is coming. To understand what happened when God spoke to Abram, we need to understand where Abram was when it happened, because we have a tendency to read the people in the Bible as already formed, already prepared, already standing at the beginning of something they were made for. But Abram's life before the call is not a blank page. It has a shape, and the shape matters. He was born in Ur of the Chaldeans. Archaeological work has shown that Ur was not a small village. It was one of the most developed cities of the ancient world. Trade, architecture, temples, a working civilization. Abram was not a man at the edge of the world looking for something. He was a man settled inside something that already functioned, already made sense, already had a place for him. And his family had already tried this journey once. Genesis chapter 11 says that Abram's father, Terah, took the family and set out from Ur toward the land of Canaan. They traveled as far as a city called Haran, and there they stopped. Terah settled in Haran. The Bible does not explain why. It simply says he settled there. And then Terah died in Haran without reaching the place he had been heading for. So when we meet Abram at the beginning of Genesis 12, we are meeting a man who is living in a city his father chose as a stopping point. A city that was never supposed to be the destination. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you." 3 things. 3 layers of what he must leave, each one closer than the last. Country is where you were born, the land that shaped your earliest sense of the world. Kindred is the people who have known you your whole life, the ones who know your family name and your history. Father's house is the most intimate of all. The daily routine, the familiar sounds, the person whose voice you grew up hearing. God did not say, "Leave some things and keep others." He said, "Leave everything that tells you who you are." All 3 circles at once. And the destination? To the land that I will show you. Not the name of a country, not a direction or an estimated time of travel. Not even, "You will know it when you see it." Just, "I will show you." When, he did not say. How far, he did not say. What it would look like when they arrived, he did not say. Go, and I will show you as you go. Then verse 4 says this, "So Abram went as the Lord had told him." Scripture records no question from him, no scene of him lying awake weighing it, no negotiation, no condition, no request for more information. The Bible simply says he went. He was 75 years old. That age is easy to read past. It should not be. At 75, you do not rebuild from scratch. You protect what the decades gave you. You know where the water sources are, which roads are safe, which people can be trusted. You have a reputation. You have relationships that took a lifetime to form. You know the rhythms of the place you live in, and the place knows you. Starting over at 75 is not the courage of a young person with open hands and nothing to lose. It is the courage of someone old enough to know precisely what he is giving up and who goes anyway. Genesis 12 says he took Sarai his wife, Lot his brother's son, all their possessions, and the people of their household. He took Lot. Lot was the son of Haran, Abram's brother, who had already died. In the middle of his own departure, packing his own life into movement, Abram did not leave a fatherless young man behind. He brought him. The Bible does not pause to honor this. It simply records it as a fact in a list. But a man dismantling everything he has and still keeping someone else's loss inside his attention, that is worth noticing. They arrived in Canaan, and God appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." Abram was standing on the promised land, and the promise was not for him. It was for his offspring. Abram had no offspring. He was 75 years old, and Sarai could not have children. God was showing him land that would belong to children who did not exist yet, spoken to a man who had no visible reason to believe they ever would. Abram built an altar. He did not argue. He did not ask God to clarify the timeline or explain what offspring meant in practical terms, given his wife's barrenness. He marked the place where God had spoken. And then the text says he journeyed on. He kept moving. Then comes the part that many retellings of this story move through too quickly. Genesis 12, verse 10. There was a famine in the land. Abram had just arrived in the place God sent him, and immediately there was no food. This is not symbolic. Famine in the ancient world meant people died, and Abram made a decision to go down to Egypt. Before they crossed the border, he said to Sarai, "I know you are a beautiful woman. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife,' and they will kill me to take you. Tell them you are my sister, so that things will go well for me." He was afraid. He asked his wife to lie, to protect him. Sarai was taken into Pharaoh's household. The Bible does not tell us what Sarai felt. It does not record her response or her expression or whether she said anything at all to her husband before they crossed that border. It simply tells us what happened next. God sent plagues on Pharaoh's house. Pharaoh discovered the truth. He called Abram in and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you tell me she was your sister?" He sent them out of Egypt. Abram left with his life, his wife, and more wealth than he had arrived with. He had lied. He had placed his wife in danger to protect himself. And God had intervened anyway, not because Abram had handled the situation well, but because God's purpose was still moving, and it did not depend on Abram's performance at this particular moment. This is one of the places where most versions of Abraham's story make a quiet mistake. They present him as a man of steady, unbroken courage from the first chapter to the last. They skip past Egypt, or they soften it, or they explain it in a way that makes Abram look reasonable under the circumstances. But the Bible does not skip it. It is in the text, placed there plainly, and it is followed by a second nearly identical incident later, with a king named Abimelech. Same fear, same lie, different country. He did it twice. The reason this matters is not to diminish Abram. It is because this story stops making sense if we turn him into someone he was not. A man of flawless courage does not need a God who keeps showing up anyway. A man who has already arrived does not teach us anything about the long walk. The weight of Abraham's story comes from the fact that God kept speaking to a man who kept failing, kept doubting, kept trying to manage things on his own. And the covenant survived all of it. not because of who Abram was, because of who God is. Years passed after Egypt. The Bible does not give us an exact count, but by the time we reach Genesis 15, scholars generally estimate that a decade or more has gone by since the first promise. God spoke to him again, and Abram answered. He said, "O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And then, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir." He was not praying a formal prayer. He was asking a hard question directly. By the custom of the time, when a man had no son, a trusted servant could legally become his heir. Eliezer was that servant, and Abram was saying plainly, without cushioning it, "I have been waiting. Nothing has happened. The practical reality in front of me looks like this. What are you actually going to do?" God did not rebuke him. He did not say, "You have failed a test," by asking. He took Abram outside. He said, "Look at the sky. Count the stars if you can count them. That is what your offspring will be like." And Abram believed him. Genesis 15 verse 6, he believed the Lord, and it was counted to him as righteousness. The Apostle Paul quotes that verse. James quotes it. And it came from a night when an old man stood under the stars and believed after asking a question that sounded less like faith and more like frustration. But God was not finished with that night. He told Abram the truth about what was ahead for his descendants. They would live as strangers in a foreign land. They would be enslaved and afflicted for 400 years. The covenant came with weight attached. God did not show Abram only the good parts. Then a deep sleep fell on Abram, and the text says, "A dreadful and great darkness came over him." That phrase in the original is not peaceful rest. It is the arrival of something enormous. And Abram was still there when the covenant was sealed, 10 years since they had arrived in Canaan. Still no son. Sarai came to Abram with a proposal. She said, "The Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go to my servant Hagar. Perhaps I will have children through her." The practice she was describing was recognized in the ancient world. The Bible records it as the custom of the time. Abram agreed. Hagar conceived, and what followed did not stay contained. Hagar began to look on Sarai differently, with contempt. Sarai blamed Abram. Abram told her to do what she wanted. Sarai treated Hagar harshly, and Hagar ran. She was alone in the wilderness, pregnant, with nowhere to go. God found her there. He spoke to her directly. He told her to return. He told her what her son would become, and he named the child before he was born. Hagar gave God a name that day. She called him the God who sees. She said, "Have I really seen him who looks after me?" In the middle of the wreckage of a situation that was not entirely her making, God went into the wilderness after a woman that everyone else had either used or driven away. The people who end up caught in the middle of other people's decisions are not invisible to God. Hagar found that out in the desert. Her story does not disappear when Ishmael is born. God saw her before she knew he was looking. Ishmael was born. Abram was 86 years old. He raised this boy. He loved him as a father loves a son. There is no suggestion in the text that he saw Ishmael as a mistake to be corrected. He was his child. And then 13 years of silence. Genesis 16 ends with Ishmael's birth. Genesis 17 opens with, "When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram." 13 years between those two verses. No record of God speaking to Abram in that time. No vision, no covenant renewal, no word at all. 13 years of raising a son who was loved, but who was not the son of the original promise. 13 years of ordinary life inside an extraordinary calling. 13 years of not knowing whether what had been said would still hold. The Bible does not tell us what those years felt like from the inside. It does not record whether Abram wondered if Ishmael had settled the question, or whether doubt still moved through him on certain mornings. The text just holds the silence. And then, after 13 years of it, God spoke again. Genesis 17. God appeared and changed Abram's name. Abram, which means exalted father, became Abraham, which means father of a multitude. He was 99 years old. He had one son who was not the son of the promise, and God called him father of a multitude. He changed Sarai's name to Sarah, and then he said, "I will bless her, and I will give you a son by her." What the Bible records next is something that gets left out of most versions of this story. Genesis 17, verse 17. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, "Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" He laughed, not in worship, not in joy. He thought it privately to himself. But God heard it. And then Abraham said aloud, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." He was asking God to count the son he already had, to work with what was already there. After 24 years of waiting, Abraham was still trying to adjust the plan into something that made sense by the standards of what was actually possible. God answered him directly, "No. Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him," not Ishmael. Isaac, the child that did not exist. That one, Isaac, was born when Abraham was 100 years old. After the birth, Sarah said, "God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me." The same laughter that had come from disbelief in chapter 17 became the name of the child in chapter 21. Isaac in Hebrew means he laughs. The word that Abraham had used privately in a moment of doubt became the name God chose for the son. God did not rename it. He kept it. He took the laughter of a man who could not quite believe and put it into the mouth of every person who would ever call this child by name. And then comes Genesis 22. God said to Abraham, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering." Everything that had taken 25 years to arrive. The child he had waited for laughed at the idea of, held in his arms, and watched grow. God was asking for him back. The Bible does not show us what the night before the journey looked like. It does not tell us what Abraham said to Sarah, or whether he slept, or what moved through him in the dark hours before morning. Scripture gives us only this: he rose early. He saddled the donkey. He cut the wood. He took 2 servants and Isaac, and he went. 3 days of walking. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place from far off. He had 3 full days to turn back. He knew where they were going, and he knew why. He kept walking. When they were close, he told the servants to stay with the donkey. He said, "I and the boy will go and worship, and we will come back to you." He said, "We will come back." The writer of Hebrews would later reflect that Abraham believed God was able to raise someone from the dead if it came to that. The Bible does not tell us that Abraham had worked out a theology of resurrection before this moment. What it tells us is what he did. He rose early. He cut the wood. He kept walking. Something inside him held the word God had spoken over Isaac as still true, even carrying the knife. On the mountain, Isaac spoke, "Father, here is the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb." They reached the place. Abraham built the altar and arranged the wood. He bound his son. He laid him on the altar. He stretched out his hand and took the knife. The angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." The angel said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. He offered it instead of his son. And he called the name of that place Yahweh Yireh. The Lord will provide. That name is still spoken today. Now I want to stand back and look at the whole arc of this life, because it is easy to arrive at the mountain and think that is the story. The mountain is the last chapter, but there are 60 years of other chapters behind it. At 75, he left everything on one sentence from God. In Egypt, he lied out of fear and endangered the person he was supposed to protect. He waited more than 10 years and then tried to produce the promise himself through Hagar, creating a situation that spread pain in 3 directions. He spent 13 years raising a son in silence, with no word from God. At 99, he laughed at the promise, privately, to himself. At 100, he held Isaac. And somewhere in the years that followed, he climbed the mountain. This is not a clean, upward line from faith to greater faith. This is a human life. It has failure in it, and silence, and moments of doubt that were not dramatic, but just ordinary, lived quietly across ordinary years. And at every point, the covenant held. Not because Abraham performed consistently enough to keep it alive, because the God who made it did not change his mind. Now the detail I promised at the beginning. The original Hebrew of Genesis 12, verse 1. God says to Abram, "Lech lecha." In most English translations, this becomes simply "go" or "go forth." But the Hebrew is unusual. Lech means go. Lecha means toward yourself, for yourself, to yourself. Lech lecha, go to yourself. It is not only a direction on a map, it carries something inward. Leave everything that has told you who you are, and in the leaving, discover who you actually are. The geographical journey and the interior one held inside the same 2 words. Abram was not only being sent to a land, he was being sent into a becoming. Both the land and the man were destinations. This is not a replacement for the literal reading. He literally traveled. He literally arrived in a literal country. But the phrase holds both things at once. And once you hear it, it is difficult to read the rest of the story without it. Lech lecha. The road outward was also a road in. The spiritual center of Abraham's life quietly challenges something many people carry without examining it closely. The idea that real faith looks like steadiness, that a person truly walking with God should be beyond fear, past doubt, no longer prone to the kind of failure that Abraham demonstrated more than once. His life does not support that picture. He was afraid in Egypt, afraid enough to put his wife at risk. He doubted at 99. He tried twice to move God's timeline with his own hands. He laughed when the promise came at the end of a long silence. None of this disqualified him. None of it caused God to withdraw what had been spoken. The covenant was not a reward for consistent faithfulness. It was a word God had given, and God kept it. What his life shows instead is something more honest and more demanding than the absence of failure. It shows a man who kept returning, who brought his real questions to God instead of performing a composed spirituality he did not feel, who at the hardest moment still rose early and moved. The promise over Abraham's life did not depend on how well he managed the waiting. It depended on whether the one who made it meant what he said. And he did. There is a structure to Abraham's call that goes beneath the events themselves. God asked him to leave 3 things: country, kindred, father's house. Each circle closer than the one before. Country is origin. Kindred is belonging. Father's house is the most personal layer of all, the voice and the daily presence that shaped how you understand yourself. God was not asking him to leave behind something corrupt or broken. He was asking him to step out of the container that had been holding the person he used to be, because the person he was becoming could not grow inside it. The old frame was not large enough for what was coming. But to make room for it, the old one had to actually be left. Not adjusted, not renegotiated. Left. The same shape appears across Scripture. Moses in the wilderness after 40 years in Pharaoh's palace. Joseph in chains, far from his father's house. The disciples leaving their boats still pulled up on the shore. In each case, the leaving was not the end of the person. It was the beginning of who they were actually going to become. Lech Lecha carries that same weight. The road away from the familiar is, in God's hands, a road towards something truer. Abraham did not know that when he packed. He found it out on the way. The world Abraham lived in is not ours. But the interior shape of what he carried is recognizable across the distance. There are people alive right now who have been holding a prayer before God for years, some for a very long time, and nothing visible has shifted. People who tried to help something along and made it harder in the process. People who have felt the gap between what they believe God said and what they can actually see, and found the gap so wide that something like laughter or something like grief came out instead of faith. Abraham's story does not hand those people a timeline. The Bible does not guarantee that the specific thing being waited for will come in the form or season expected. God's ways are genuinely not ours, and his timing belongs entirely to him. But Abraham's life offers something honest into that place. It offers the image of a man who arrived at the hardest test, not because he had been perfect during the wait, but because he had stayed. He was still there. The door between him and God was still open, even through the years that looked from the outside like nothing was happening. And that staying, that dailiness of continuing to show up, was itself a form of faithfulness. Not dramatic, not visible, real. Sometimes what God asks us to leave is not a place on a map. Sometimes it is an identity that no longer matches the calling forming inside us. And the reason we hesitate is not always unbelief. Often it is that we cannot yet see where the road leads. Abraham could not see it either. The land was not described in advance. It was shown along the way. Lech Lecha. Go. The clarity comes during the journey, not before it begins. And if you are somewhere inside a long silence right now, if the years are accumulating and the promise feels further away rather than closer, remember that the longest silence in Abraham's record is 13 years between 2 chapters. He was not removed from the story during those years. He was living it, quietly, without a word from God, without confirmation that the original promise was still in play, without anything visible to show that the wait had a direction. And when God spoke again in Genesis 17, he did not begin with an explanation of the silence. He simply showed up, and Abraham was still there to receive it. Abraham died at the age of 175. Genesis 25 says he died at a good old age, an old man full of years, and was gathered to his people. Full of years. Not a clean story, not a triumphant one in the way we might prefer it to be. There is Egypt in it, and Hagar, and the laughter of disbelief, and 13 years of quiet, and a knife held over the son he had waited his entire life to hold. But he kept going. He rose early when it cost him everything. He built altars in places where God had spoken and then moved on. He saddled the donkey. He kept walking. And the God who had called him with 2 quiet words at the beginning, Lech Lecha, go to yourself, was still speaking to him at the very end. He was given the name Father of a multitude before he had more than one son. He was named by his ending before he reached it. And he lived into that name. Not in one dramatic moment on a mountain. In the small, mostly unrecorded movements of 100 years, most of them witnessed by no one except the God who was always there before Abraham arrived. If this story reached something in you today, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who is in a long season of waiting. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below telling us what part of Abraham's life spoke to you. Your words might land exactly where someone else needs them today. We will see you in the next story.